Thank you. It's such a little thing, so scary, right? Anyway, just wanted to ask you, how do you work? So which camera are you using? If you're digital, analogical, or if you change according to the work or the project you're focusing, and yeah, technical stuff.
Um, well, I started photography when I was a kid, so I worked with film cameras for a big part of my life, and then I came to New York, and everything had moved to digital, and um, it took me a while to accept it, but finally I did accept it. Actually, when I traveled with the circus, I was still shooting with both. I had a film camera and a digital camera at that point. But for example, Yonqueros, I shot entirely digital, and I had only one lens that I used the entire year because I wanted to keep the feeling consistent. So I had a 35 millimeter lens uh, that that forced me to be within arm's length of the people that I wanted to photograph. I wasn't interested in shooting candid, uh, telescopic, like safari style, not at all. I really wanted to just engage with the people and meet them and find out about them. So that was, let's say, my choice for Yonqueros was to shoot digital, and then digital was also part of the production. Um, I wanted to convert all of the images to black and white. So using digital technology, you can do it a certain way that is different than the darkroom, and uh, every project has a different technical requirement to it. When I photographed youth orchestras in Guatemala, I needed more flexibility. So in that case, I did use a zoom lens that, that was very steady in low light. And it's every project, you find the right tool for it.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I really enjoyed it. It was very interesting.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, if you come here, you will also be.
Thank you.
Hello.
Hello.
Really very interesting stories, three of them, and really touchy. I wonder, you said while we were chatting before, you are here for 2 years so far. So I wonder, from your eyes as a photographer, what are the stories that you see in the city that you would go after?
That's a great question. There's a place called Uljiro, which reminds me a lot of Willets Point. It's also being gentrified really, really quickly. And there's still, like the magic of making things by hand and the smells of the industrial side of Uljiro, gasoline and thinner and oil. And it's beautiful. To me, it's beautiful, but it's not really my story to tell, and I'm also late in the game for it. That's a story that I should have been photographing 5 or 10 years ago. So I recognize that it's not for me to tell that story, and it's also not the right time to tell it. But that's a story that really fascinates me, and I love going to that neighborhood anyway. Then there's other things that I want to understand about Korea that I think would make good projects, and I'm keeping track of those inside my head. We've been really busy with my wife adapting to our new life in Seoul after 3 decades in New York. We decided to move here, and we have twin boys. They're really young. So photography for me in Seoul has been more random, more like a loosely kept diary. I make certain observations half the time. I make them when I'm riding my bike. But I haven't really, started working on a new project here yet. My next step is to get Olmedini's work published as a book. And then I think that will be sort of the end of my New York chapter. When that's done, then I'll feel like it's time to start something. And so, but you never know. I might see something tomorrow and okay, let's get going. And I mean, that's part of it. Even with Willets Point, I remember the first day that I went out, and I had been reading about it in the back pages of newspapers and been curious about it for at least 6 months. And one day I just decided that I would go. I had the choice of, it was a Saturday, I had the choice of having brunch with Haiti Young and staying home and having a quiet Saturday. But I decided to just take the train instead and go to Willets Point with my camera and see what would happen. And it's very mysterious how projects start, and it's equally mysterious how projects end.
Thank you. Marguerite, hello. Good morning, Shanghai.
Good morning. Thank you. Jaime, thank you for such an endearing presentation. I appreciate you saying how the human heart is about feeling and transcendence. As an art lover, I am always touched and moved by the stories behind the artwork, right? So my question to you is, do you always approach every project with that mindset that the human heart is about feeling and transcendence, or does that feeling comes upon you as you enter the project in the midst of it?
What a great question. My temperament, you know, being Latin American, is I think I'm more on the romantic side of things. That's just part of how I grew up. You know, we're warm, we're you know, combative sometimes, but we're very passionate and open to other people. So I've always been interested in people, and that's usually what draws me into a project, is that how they live is different than how I live, and there's something I can learn about the world and about myself by putting myself in that situation. That's one part of it. I'm very attracted to outsiders, and I grew up as an outsider myself in Guatemala. I'm Jewish. There were less than 1,000 Jews in Guatemala, in a country of 9 million people. So the minority beyond the minority beyond the minority, right? I mean, we're almost invisible, but yet we have an impact on the society. So I felt like an outsider growing up, and I'm continue to be attracted to people who play by their own rules, far from the mainstream, and have their own way of doing things. And that's a big part of why I choose a new project. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
There's a question in the living room.
Coming. Oh,
I hope it's not a trick question.
sorry, just 1 second. I first looked at Brad, and then Brad. Look. Otherwise, yes. But if you can tell, otherwise I will read your question.
Why don't you read it?
So I just read it. Wonderful work and art. Junqueira seems to show a fascination for the rough. Oh, okay, you're there.
Hi, yes, sorry.
Okay.
I just saw the pop-up. Can you unmute me? Yeah, sorry about that. Thank you so much for such a generous and wonderful, inspiring presentation and talk. Yeah, I wanted to ask about, can you hear me, by the way? Is it clear?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, sorry. Yeah, the Junqueira series shows such a fascination for these like rough materials and textures of both like the people and the work environment. And yeah, I was wondering where that sort of deep fascination comes from for this as well, in this sort of your personal experience. Sorry, as I was writing this, you just mentioned your own Jewish upbringing, and I was interested if you were, exposed to a similar sort of working class human fabric, if you like, yeah, and where these sort of where you think in your own experience these impressions and the sort of storytelling element that comes from.
Yeah, I guess something that really prepared me for Yunqueros was traveling with the circus in Guatemala. In a way, you're dealing with a similar kind of person, somebody who is at the end of their rope, I would say, somebody who is going through a kind of revolving door. And in the circus, people come in and out of the circus life all the time, not because they're necessarily trained for the circus, but because they have nowhere else to go. And it's the same with the mechanics in Willets Point. They didn't study to be mechanics. They learn by doing. They learn on the job from other people who learned on the job, and it's an opportunity for redemption, for finding legitimate work. I thought it was very strange that these guys who were born in Mexico and Ecuador ended up living in a kind of lunar landscape that is a no man's land, 45 minutes away from Manhattan. I mean, it seemed like such a bizarre. I mean, I met mechanics from El Salvador who would say we had better mechanic shops in El Salvador, and now we're working like this, So there was something very surreal and surprising about that, and because they were Latin American, I wanted to investigate that further as well. Eventually, Willets Point was broken apart. It was disbanded. And what happened to those mechanics and to the 300 plus businesses that were active at the time says something about New York City as well. So looking at these mechanics from Latin America is looking at myself, but it's also looking at our city at the time of New York, and what that city had become. I remember going to Willets Point and thinking that I had woken up in the Depression era, during the Great Depression of the 1930s, in a Walker Evans photograph, from the time. And I started wondering, so what's changed between the 1930s and 2010, when there was another economic depression, by the way, and questions like, who are the new migrants? Why is the United States again going through this economic crisis? These are all things that interested me. And of course, the fact that they were Latin Americans living in New York like myself. So those were things that helped me structure the project, give it a concept, give it a framework. Fred, I don't know if I answered your question. I hope I did.
Thank you very much. Yeah, very interesting.
Back to the beginning.
Stranger, I have a question.
After knowing me so many years.
Yeah, it's not about, if two twins brush their teeth. Yeah, it's about your work. I think I haven't asked you about this. The Street Become is not your first archival project. Right. It's your second. But now I think about it, you always make like a human connection with your subject, especially like Yunqueros or Medini. You're very close to your subject. You build a relationship before getting like a deep in the project. But with the archival project, you don't have that human connection. You work on the desk with an archival, like a slides, or how do you find interest, and what's the difference on the experience?
That's a really interesting question. I would say the archive, for example, with The Street Becomes, was a possibility to imagine a life for myself that I didn't live, because so many Guatemalans were exiled during the Civil War and ended up in Washington, D.C. My family didn't, and I didn't, but I could have, on some level, I could have grown up in Washington, D.C. So that was part of what was going through my head when I was making this project is this could have been my life. I mean, I could have gone out for the Latino Festival looking for enchiladas and, you know, watching the gigantes walk on the street in stilts. It could have been part of my experience. And it wasn't, but it seemed relevant. So at that level, I tried to make it personal. On another level, the archive, at least from the Latino Festival, which we're talking 1980s, is not a dead archive by any means. Some of the people who appear in the photographs are still living in that neighborhood in Washington, D.C. So, so that was part of the human connection, you know, trying to get closer and closer to their orbit, to their neighborhood, to their way of life. So even though it wasn't, I wasn't taking any pictures and I wasn't participating in the lives of others, I was trying to do something like that by getting inside the images and reworking them and activating them in a different manner. Because that's finally what I want from the archive is to explore new meanings in it, to make it relevant again, or to give it a new narrative.
Thank you. Now, Alexandra. Are you there? Hello.
That's me.
Thailand.
Hi. Hello, everyone. Hello to Shanghai, to everyone in Shanghai and the rest. Hi, Jamie. Thank you very much for the... Can you hear me? I'm not sure if it works well. Yeah. Thank you very much for the presentation. I think the story of your magician is just the essence of photography. I mean, I think it's a dream story for any photographer. You made a change, which is absolutely magic. So thank you for that. I have a question regarding Jonqueros. I'm a photographer and filmmaker myself, and so it's going to be technical and very precise. You mentioned you worked with those people for a year, long time. I can imagine those weren't easy subjects to approach, and you had to gain their trust over the period that you worked with them. As about the man who you photographed from the back. And my question is, when I'm working on the documentary project, I approach my subjects, I choose them, I make a connection, I get the story, I take a picture, and then at the end, I have to pull out from my back pocket the piece of paper, which is a release form, which basically is like selling the soul for the infinite time to my own purpose. You know, and I feel like a fraud every time I do that. I mean, I try to do that maybe in the beginning, maybe at the end. You know, I have a language barrier. I work with minorities groups, so I have 1, 2, or 3 people in between us to make the translation of what I need. I feel even more fraudulent because there is no way those people understand what they are signing if they are signing it. Mm-hmm. So my question is, how do you deal with that mentally as well? And legally, as a New Yorker, you know very well, it's better to have this piece of paper with you. Mm-hmm. I mean, the romance stops, you know what I mean? It's so beautiful, beautiful, and then, you know.
I know what you're saying, absolutely. With Olmedini, it was even more difficult because he couldn't read the release. So the moral problem there is more complicated. You know, somebody signing a piece of paper they can't read. So that's why you have a witness on the release as well. You have the person who signs and then another witness that's necessary. I prefer to just get it over with at the beginning before anybody commits time and energy to anything. And so, you know, I explain it if I need to explain it. Before we go any further, you know, we need to get through this. You get it over quickly, it doesn't sting as bad. And if somebody hasn't really, you know, started working, then they always have the option of not working. I think there's a value in doing these kinds of projects. And I'm sure you agree as well, because you do them. There's a value to yourself, obviously, as a photographer, but also to the greater society. These stories are important. They need to be told. And Olmedini didn't pay me to do this, and I didn't pay him. But we both felt the value of it. And our collaboration lasted for 3 years until COVID put a stop to it. And Olmedini and I still talk about once a month. And whenever he leaves me a message, he always asks about my children and always asks about my wife. And then he asked about me, always in that order. First the twins, then the wife, then me. And I know about his children. And so, you know, at this point, we're almost like family. And I have maybe 50 releases that he signed for me every time we shot, just because that's the law. That's the law in New York. So every single time we got together to shoot, I had to have him sign the paper. That was not the case with Yonqueros. That was still not an issue when I did the work with Yonqueros. And anyway, many of the names they gave me were made up because they were there illegally. So, you know, that wouldn't have gotten me very far in court. You know, who is Luis? Oh, Luis? Which of them? There's 10 Luises in your photographs. You know, yeah, it's a burden. I think, at least in the United States, you can still take pictures on the street and it's not illegal. That might change someday. I know places like France, you cannot shoot strangers on the street without their consent. And when you think about that, what you're erasing is our cultural history. Imagine if you didn't have photographs of what the 1940s looked like or what the 1950s looked like. It would be a terrible loss for us. We just wouldn't know. So how did it look back then? Did it look the same? No, it didn't. Did people walk the street the same way? Did they play the same way? Did they have arguments the same way? Did they kiss the same way? Did they get drunk the same way? You know, all of those questions, we need photographs to tell us. And that's being taken away. So get out and shoot as much as you can. If Cartier-Bresson was born in Paris today, he would definitely have stayed a painter. Because he was trained as a painter. And I don't think he would have become a street photographer. No chance. Not in this climate. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks. Okay. Now, anyone else? Otherwise, you know what I'm saying.
Time for more coffee.
Ooh, one more. Oh, another one coming. Oh, okay. No, that's good. I'm very happy. Great. Please, yeah.
Thank you. Well, first of all, thank you so much, Jaime. This is really interesting. And I was wondering, where can we read you? Because I know where can we can see your photos, but you've given us such a wonderful insight, and with your reflections and your comments and your experience. Is there any place where are you putting this in writing somewhere, a column or a book or something?
Well, every like Yonqueros has 2 essays, really. The title essay by Francisco Goldman, which if you know his writing, the guy is just absolutely brilliant. In his essay, he compares the mechanics of Willets Point to magicians and mariners, and he talks about their tattoos and their talismans, and he compares Willets Point to the lost city of Atlantis, and talks about junkyard reefs. And I mean, amazing essay. I will always be indebted to Goldman for that. But I also have an epilogue in the book where I tell it more like it was. You know, the more sort of like socioeconomic facts of Willets Point and how it was structured, and also where I inserted myself and how I understood it coming to that landscape and staying there for a year. So the book has an epilogue that I wrote. The street becomes, there is no title essay per se. It's interview/conversation between myself and Olivia Cadaval, who I mentioned before as the director of the Folk Art Museum. She was the only person that I know of who wrote about the Latino Festival for decades in a serious academic manner. So I knocked on her door and I said, Olivia, you know, can we have a conversation and you tell me what the archive means to you as an academic and what the Latino Festival means to you, knowing all the players firsthand. And then I can respond to that from the point of view of the artist and how I encounter the same archive, if you will. So there's an essay there as well. Recently, I was commissioned by Adobe, the company that makes Photoshop. They have another software called Lightroom, and they have a Lightroom Academy, which is a kind of educational initiative. So they commissioned me to write 5 essays about the intersection of photography and writing. And those are being translated, so they'll be out later this year, and I'll send you a link.
Okay, we take one more question from Gary. Hi,
Good
Gary.
morning. Good morning, Jamie.
Good morning. Hi.
Hi, it's quite shame that I was about to go to Raffaella's the living room. Then I kept looking at the invitation. I realized, oh, maybe it's just only available online. So I just came back. Then I feel shame that I'm actually looking at you through the Zoom, but I still appreciate that your presentations. And I was quite inspired by your approach in humanitarian the perspective, and then my heart got really melted by looking at it through the Zoom. I'm just curious that understanding your experience in Latino culture, that's where you're born, and I moved to New York, where the oldest the artist is quite a struggle in New York, although they possess their talent in general, and then being able to have that heart and being able to deliver your heart through the lens is quite impressive. And now that you are based in Seoul, I've been here 3 years, if I'm correct.
2 years.
2 years, and you went through the COVID, and at the end of the day, what I realized is COVID made us realize how important our human connection is. And I'm not an artist, and I always appreciate what is art is like, and we appreciate more talented artists who has a heart like you. And now you went through all those different movement, migrations, family, family situation change in Seoul. And how would you like to interpret how would you like to see the human connections through your experience in different continents and after COVID? I would like to see, because you just mentioned that how people get drunk in different culture and etc. Even that, I mean, we cannot actually deliver as deeply as you can see. We have this iPhone, simply just take a photo, it's very spontaneous, but we don't have the soul in it. And I would like to see that. I know that you have not worked on any project in Seoul yet because you're busy and you just try to accumulate the different experience through your artistic sense and etc. But it'll be quite interesting to see that through your experience, how you would like to interpret this cultural diverse and humanitarian approach in this city. Because everyone talk about this K-pop and etc. But I would like to see how you have seen in humanitarian approach in this city.
Thank you. I mean, it remains to be seen. I'm not exactly sure which direction that might take. I do know that I'll probably choose a project that allows me to learn as much as I can about Korea, about some aspect of life in Korea that can help me get deeper here and help me be a part of things, help me feel like there's a good reason for me to be here.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now we take one last question. This is really a lot. Of course, it's amazing, and I'm very happy for this. But last but not least, here we are. Charlie, hi. Good morning. You have to unmute yourself. I cannot do it for you.
I'm unmuting myself.
Hi.
Hi, it's I'm Charlie. I was just wondering, it must be a challenge to maintain the momentum and direction in a long project. How do you deal with that over the period of time that you've been doing this longer project? And then ultimately, how do you decide when it's finished? You know, where's the end point? It's never finished, maybe. I don't know.
Those are great questions. Thank you, Charlie. Let's see. Olmedini came to an end because COVID happened. So I didn't have any control over that. We ended up moving out of New York after decades of living there. And for that project, I'll just have to turn that absence or that shortcoming into a strength somehow. When it comes to designing the book, I'll have to come to terms with that, what it meant, and it's going to be part of the storytelling. There's another difficulty with Olmedini, and it's that documentary photographers are not supposed to affect the outcome of what they're representing, of what they're documenting. And the New York Times publication turned things around for Olmedini. So in a sense, that's unconventional as well. It might even be 2 books or 2 parts of the book. I'm not sure exactly how to handle that aspect. With Yonkeros, I had pretty much set up the dummy for the book, and I thought it would be all black and white. And then there was a snowstorm close to Christmas, and it was very difficult to get out there. It took me like 3 hours just to get out to Willets Point, and when I got there, were maybe 3 guys who were working. And I thought I would end it apocalyptically, you know, with a whiteout, all images of the blizzard, and you know, like that the ending of Garcia Marquez' 100 Years of Solitude, where the last of the Buendia family is inside a room trying to decipher a text, and he's trying to decipher, and finally he starts making sense of it, and he realizes that death is outside the door and is coming to claim him. And I thought, wow, okay, this is the ending for Yonkeros. But then about 2 weeks after that, there was a second snowstorm that was just as rough. And so you can make your own rules, but then you have to live by them. So I knew that my ending was a false ending. And I went back to Willets Point before the sunrise. I got there around, I guess, 4:30 a.m. and waited for the sun to rise over the snow. And it was beautiful, pastel, soft colors over the snow. So then I understood that I had to include color in the book. And that brought me one step closer to realizing the book. And yes, how you end it is mysterious. One of the last images in the book is a photograph of an ice cream truck standing still in the snow. And I continued shooting after that snowstorm. And eventually, a few months later, I saw that ice cream truck, that same ice cream truck in operation. And I took a picture. You found it? Can I show it? I'll borrow this book for a moment. Okay.
Yeah, we have to.
Here. Okay. That's the truck in the snow. Can I find the one that I took after that? I'm not so sure. Well, I returned a few months later. Oh, here it is. Okay. And when I took this picture, I put the lens cap back on my camera. And I said to myself, that's it. I'm done. Because I understood in my own head, suddenly understood, okay, that's the cycle that I wanted, you know, like a whole year has gone by. So if you're a careful reader, and that's the kind of reader that I make the books for, not the casual reader in a hurry, but somebody who will return to the book a couple of times. I think you'll realize that you've seen that ice cream truck before. And then maybe that'll make you look back for the time you saw it earlier, and then you realize the seasons. But every project is so mysterious. You couldn't generalize. How do you keep it going? It gets easier in time. Are you a photographer too, Charlie? Say yes. One finger.
Yeah,
no.
yes and no. Yes and no in a sense. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean,
but not in the same way. Not in the same. I mean, I haven't sort of pursued this at any kind of long-term kind of projects, but I do work in media.
Yeah, I mean, it's a matter of faith. It's a matter of love. Like, how badly do you want it? How committed are you? How much blood, sweat, and tears are you willing to put on the line to make it happen? It comes down to that, really. But how do you keep it going? Well, if you have friends, you can show the work to your friends and get some feedback, or like I did with Olmedini, when I felt that I had enough material to publish something, then I sent it out. And you can start releasing the work at certain points, and then that continues to build momentum as well. So that finally, I mean, you envision something for the project. Not every project is a book project. Not every project is an exhibition. But you have a vision for it, and you try to make logical steps to take you there.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. And now I think I can say class business.
Thank you, Raffaella.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.